Oh, we have people joining us. Welcome into the space, everyone. Thanks for being with us for the next hour. I'm going to get started in a couple of minutes. Feel free in the meantime to post your name in the chat. Let us know any affiliation you have, where you're coming from geographically today. And welcome. We'll get started in a minute or so. It is raining where I am. I just want to note that. Is it raining where you are? Maybe you can let us know in the chat. It's raining in Bellingham. News just in, it's raining in Bellingham. Unclear whether it's raining anywhere else at this point. I see a few more people joining us. I'm going to wait one more minute and get going. I know that we're also recording this session for folks who couldn't make it. Raining in Green Lake. All right, I'm going to get us started because I think we have a lot that we want to talk about in the next hour. So welcome. My name is Vicky Clark. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the policy director with Cascade Bicycle Club, and I am incredibly excited to be moderating this panel of awesome people today to have this conversation about sustainable transportation and climate and land use. So with that, let's get going. Our agenda for today, we're going to spend a few minutes doing some introductions. Who are these amazing people that we're with? We have a few questions that I think are going to elicit some good conversation, and then want to save some time at the end for your questions. Do feel free to be posting those questions in the chat throughout the conversation as they come to you. And we will collect them all together at the end to ask them at the end. So we'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. Today's panel is virtual and folks are joining from around the state. I personally am speaking from Suquamish tribal land here in Kitsap County. But as Cascade, also we acknowledge the land that we sit on and occupy today as the traditional home of the Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribal nations. Without them, we would not have access to this environment, and we take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here today. And if you don't know what land you're on, you can find out at a link that we will post in the chat in just 1 second. Why are we here? Why is Cascade Bicycle Club talking about land use and climate? So May is Bike Month, and communities across the country and locally celebrate biking as transportation, recreation, and part of our everyday lives. This year at Cascade, we're using Bike Month to shine a light on the intersections between bike advocacy and climate justice. Every trip we take by bike is a small but mighty climate action. Obviously, we cannot, as individuals, solve the climate crisis, but we can do our own part. And we also know that riding a bike alone isn't the only solution, and that's kind of what we want to explore both through this panel and through other events we've been hosting this month. As people who love bikes, we must also speak up and join with others to push for action that will make our communities more resilient to the harmful impacts of climate change and enable people to live low carbon lives. And so with that, today's panel, I want to introduce our panelists. In fact, I'm going to have the panelists introduce the panelists because they know themselves better than I do. And so today's panel is Sustainable Transportation and Resilient Climate, is Land Use the Crux? with us. We have Robin Schwartz, Laura Lowe, and Jamie Patek. I just screwed up your name completely. I'm sorry. And so I'm going to start with Jamie, who can tell you how her name is actually pronounced.
Thanks, Vicky. It's all good. You're among many, many friends in mispronouncing my last name. I'm Jamie Potasic. I use she, hers pronouns, and I'm the lead field organizer with FutureWise. FutureWise is a nonprofit that works on land use issues across Washington state, both on the state and local levels. And land use is, this very broad net that includes everything from transportation. We of all these of what we do pivots around our state's Growth Management Act, which is, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's a big wonky body of policy that drives land use decisions on the local level. My work specifically is to build grassroots momentum amongst advocates and our partner organizations to try to pass bills into law at the state level that will improve Washington's growth management planning. So yeah, that's what I do broadly, and I'm excited for this conversation and to chat in a little bit more detail about how all of these issues intersect each other.
Jamie. Laura.
Hi, everyone. Today I'm representing Share the City's community education. We go out and talk to neighbors, neighbor to neighbor in the community. We're doing a lot of doorbelling and door knocking and canvassing and tabling in communities. We actually just spoke to a classroom, 8 classrooms of 11th graders recently. And Share the City's community education is the side of Share the Cities that is really focused on land use, specifically in Northeast Seattle, and working on skilling up people because it's such a wonky topic. So acronyms are hard. I've written a bunch of things called Acronyms for Action around getting people to know what an EIS is, or what the Growth Management Act is, or who SDCI is. And we've done walking tours of our industrial lands where we have land use experts come and we see it in real time. A long time ago, we did microhousing walking tours. So that's the side I'm representing today. We also have an action fund side where we yell at elected officials about land use and teach other people how to be effectively angry at your elected officials. So I can help you with that as well. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm a renter in Seattle, and I was born in Bogota, Colombia, and I'm a white presenting woman. I use she, her pronouns. I have brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt with some earrings on and curly hair. And yeah, looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say today.
Effective anger. I like that. I have a lot of that. I don't know if it's effective. Thanks, Laura. And Robin.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks everyone for having me. My name's Robin Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns. I work at the Duwamish River Community Coalition. I do development and advocacy there. So grant writing and then advocacy. Basically, I just kind of try to go to as many community meetings as I can in the area we serve, which is the Duwamish Valley. DRCC staffs my time on the Georgetown Community Council, the South Park Neighborhood Association, a couple more greening, or the people for Duwamish Waterway Park. And then I've spent a lot of time in the last 4 years representing DRCC on the Duwamish Valley Affordable Housing Coalition. We are a new coalition that's working to develop affordable housing in the Duwamish Valley, and with specific attention paid to anti-displacement and keeping folks who are here or who have been recently displaced, trying to get them back. I came to all of these spheres of social justice and organizing through my time on the PTA at our elementary school, Concord International in South Park, where I live. My executive director at DRCC pulled me from my job. We met on PTA and she pulled me from my job, and that's kind of how the lens that I look at all of these issues through. It's really was very eye-opening when my oldest kid started school at a low-income public school. I myself grew up in Seattle, and my public schools on Capitol Hill had everything that we needed, but it's a real different story these days. And the experience of public education in Seattle is really disparate. So that is, sorry, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And especially, I think housing and displacement, it's been pretty painful for me to be raising my kids in South Park and seeing every year more and more families, you know, displaced against their will from this community that they helped build. So that's, PTA is my real baby, and this housing coalition is my second real baby. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about how we can help keep folks where they want to be living and where they have been living. Thanks.
Thank you all. We are also pro kitty, so it's okay if Robin's cat wants to be part of the conversation. I will just say a little bit more about Cascade Bicycle Club. We are a statewide advocacy organization focused on making biking safer and more accessible, making it so that everyone who wants to can ride a bike where they need to go. And I think for us, the entree into this conversation is historically and currently, we're pretty focused on bike infrastructure, but to be thinking myopically about bike lanes and, oh, people can just bike if they have a bike lane is on many levels far too narrow. And specifically, what are we going to do? Are we just going to build a bike lane and someone's going to bike 3 miles, 8 miles, 15, 50 miles to their job, to their childcare, to all the other places they need to go? We recognize that to realize our vision of people being able to walk and bike and take transit, we have to think dramatically beyond the bike lane, and land use is clearly a piece of that. So that's my entree into this conversation. And before we kind of jump into the questions, I just want to kind of name the way I'm going to structure this conversation is, let's talk about the status quo of land use. Where are we right now? Have a little bit of conversation around that. There are new ideas floating around and being advanced, and we want to have a big meaty conversation about those conversations, about Growth Management Act, about 15-minute cities, what that really means in practice, and then close out with what's happening now. What can people do with this information that they're gathering today, and how can people get involved? So with that, I want to jump back to you, Jamie, and I'm hoping you can answer the most simple question, which is, what are the land use policies that exist in our communities today, and how have they impacted our built environment? I recognize this is a huge question.
Okay. Oops, sorry. My internet is being a little wonky. Were you done? You just froze for me.
It was done. You could turn your video off a little bit, but yeah, because you're freezing up a little bit. Tell us about the land use context today, Jamie.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn my video off, and I apologize. I don't know if it's the rain or the clouds or what. So when we think about land use decisions, everything with how our built environment looks, and just looking at your front doors right now, your neighborhood structured, what you have access to, what your transit options are, all stem from land use decisions. And in Washington State, we have, which is pretty unique, this thing called the Growth Management Act. And this is a series of state statutes that was first adopted in 1990. And it requires that our fast growing cities and counties are developing what we call comprehensive plans to manage. Comprehensive plans are really the centerpiece of local planning. There's a series of goals and objectives and policies and standards to be incorporated in them to guide the day-to-day decisions by our elected officials and local government staff. And so there are themes in the Growth Management Act that form the basis for comprehensive plans. This is from concentrating urban growth, all protecting critical areas, planning for transportation and housing and capital facilities, as well as thinking about economic development and public participation and recreation opportunity. And so each Washington city and county that plans under the Growth Management Act has to periodically review their plan. A bill just passed this last year that has shifted that review period to 10 years. So every 10 years, cities and counties have to look at their plan, look at their new projected growth numbers, and update it as and passed through the legislature. There's really a strong emphasis on implementation, since a lot of the goals in comprehensive plans can't be achieved without really strong regulatory and financial support. So you can really, when I think about land use planning and I think how it works in Washington state, a good way to frame it is just sort of imagining this trickle down system where our Growth Management Act sort of sets these broad goals and requirements for what city and counties need to plan for. And then cities and counties write comprehensive plans that detail how they're going to meet their requirements. And then they have to set development regulations and make budgeting decisions at the local level that will actually help them to realize those changes on the ground. So that's everything from capital budget decisions to zoning and requirements, and different regulations around development. So yeah, that's kind of broad strokes how land use planning works in Washington. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks. I appreciate that overview of a very complicated subject. I guess let's talk a little bit about density strategies and how they are working on the ground, and how they do or don't work for multimodal transportation. And I want to invite Laura into this question too.
Sure. So, so the GMA, what Jamie was just talking about, I dropped some link from FutureWise there. They've educated me a lot over the years about the GMA, and zooming out on a national level, it is a really special thing in Washington state, and it really has shaped us and this conversation around land use, no matter where you live in Washington state, for years and years and years, for decades. And other states really could have benefited from this, because what it is an anti-sprawl mechanism that says we have beautiful natural resources, we have farms, we have forests, we need to protect them, and we need a legal mechanism to defend them. So one of the things, just to like love FutureWise for a second, is they have a lawyer, Tim, who's out there defending it, and is, you know, the Caped Crusader out there defending our farms and our forests. At a local level, for folks that want to get around, whether it's in, you know, Auburn or Maple Valley or Seattle, or I see folks here from like Yakima and all over, if you want to get around by bike, you know, there's a lot of things that factor into that. And if you want to get around, you know, to bike for transportation every single day, there are so many barriers, and a connected network, I think, is the most important thing, is making sure that there aren't gaps. Because someone like me that just started riding a bike 4 years ago, I just don't go anywhere, because I don't ever know what's going to happen. I don't know when all of a sudden I'm going to have to be pushed into a parking lot or a sidewalk or through a construction zone, or that there's these random gaps everywhere. And so there's just a lot of, like, for me, uncertainty. I would need, you know, a constant buddy to be with me to navigate all that. And even then, you know, bike lanes are so narrow that I can't go side by side in a lot of places, you know, to have that kind of buddy system. So you know, the more you zoom in on a very specific local level with land use, the more you can see that just doing like these like surface level changes aren't enough. And then, you know, and then you get into the equity piece of being able to afford it, being able to fix the bike, being able to, you know, feel like you have the knowledge yourself, you know, access to repair that doesn't cost a lot of money or is convenient, and on and on and on. Being able to bring it onto transit. There's a lot of folks that have bicycles in Seattle that aren't compatible with, you know, either I was a bus driver, you know, that are not compatible with the bus system, that are not compatible with the light rail, and And so I guess what I'm advising people to do is you have to see it all the way to the end. So the thing you're advocating for, you have to like see it all the way through. And just passing good legislation or whatever isn't enough. And there's that community education piece where you can, in everyday conversations, really highlight the kind of really deep, fine-grained approach to things, you know, with people over the kitchen table, with your parents, with your grandparents. That piece is really missing. I think a lot of times we do concentrate it on like that advocacy to electeds, but in order to build that movement for these fine-grained changes, no matter where you live, for people that want to bike around, you need to have those ongoing movement building conversations. So yeah, so land use in terms of climate friendly infrastructure, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that climate is part of our comprehensive planning. Comprehensive planning process that happens in cities over a certain side under our beautiful Growth Management Act. The comp plan is where we have these long multi-year conversations that shape the future. Climate analysis and a climate lens on those is new and still an ongoing like advocacy fight at the state level that Jamie was part of in the last session and FutureWise. But we can still fight for it at a local level and make sure that when we're doing these comprehensive plans, climate is centered and getting around without a car is centered in that analysis. And so yeah, I'm going to stop there, talk more about comprehensive planning later. But
Laura, yeah, I
basically
think
from top to bottom, we just have to we always have to be zooming in and looking for gaps.
yeah, I really appreciate your point about the kitchen table conversations, because it is really hard to talk about GMA comp plans like with my friends and neighbors as I think about like the community that I wanna see in the place that I live, and just how impactful land use is, but it's kind of invisible, right? It's all these invisible rules that like have made how we get around on a day-to-day basis, but we can't, it's so there, but it's so not there. And Robin, I want to invite you into the conversation. I know in your intro, you talked a lot about displacement and displacement in South Park and the Duwamish Valley. And I'd love for you to talk about how the land, I get the sense that it's land use policies that are at the root of a lot of that displacement. And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that and help pass it apart for us.
Sure, thanks. I'm not a real expert at policy, but when we're talking about displacement in South Park specifically, and policy, the one thing that really jumps out to me was, a few years ago when the city was upzoning certain neighborhoods at the HALA, the Housing and Living Affordability Initiative or Act, I think it was. You can't do these policies with a broad brush. You have to be really thoughtful. So when they upzoned South Park, they just happened to only upzone the 3 arterials in our community, which also happened to be where all of our multifamily housing is, and which is also the very most affordable housing in South Park. So a lot of it was what we tend to call naturally occurring affordable housing. It's not the greatest, a lot of the buildings were in bad condition, but they were affordable for our families here. And one by one over the last 2-3 years, they've just been purchased, demolished, and rebuilt into really expensive townhomes. So that's an example of a policy that really had good intentions. And also if they're not, they were supposed to build a certain amount of affordable units in the new ones, or pay money to a pot at the city. And I don't believe any affordable units have been built in those. So it needs to be well thought out, and you need to understand the circumstances. I also wanted to comment a little bit on what Laura was saying about kitchen table conversations. We have found here, or I have found here in my work in the Duwamish Valley, that you can't just have a meeting and say, oh, well, if people are interested, they're going to come. You need to consider who you're trying to reach. We try to offer, well, before COVID, we tried to offer childcare and dinner or a meal at every one, because that gets folks in. You have to have interpretation, you have to know the main languages. You need to make it accessible for folks. Otherwise they will miss out on the conversation, and that's not good organizing, I think.
I appreciate that. And Jamie, I see we lost you and now you're back, and I want to invite you back into the conversation to see if you have anything to add as we kind of round out. I think I appreciate, Robin, the laying out the unintended consequences of these like smaller up zones. And I think the other piece I get the sense of is just general, like if there's not enough housing supply, then the cost of housing all over the city goes up, right? And there's that other piece, pushing people to live further out. Like I just moved out of Seattle because ultimately I can't afford it. And so like, okay, now how am I going to get into Seattle now? And what are my choices around transportation? And it makes it even harder to bike, right? The idea that you can live close to your live close to all of your needs is feels like it's becoming further and further out of reach within this status quo. I know that one idea that has been floating around, I think, for a couple of years now, this idea of the 15-minute city, which I know that Paris has really leaned into over the pandemic, and a lot of conversation around this vision of communities where you can indeed get to the grocery store, your childcare center, your job, everything. It sounds amazing. I'm so let's do it. I'm skeptical. It's a really interesting, compelling idea because I think it speaks to what we want as humans, right? Like we want these interactions. We want to be able to see friendly faces on the street and get to know the same people, and to be able to just get around comfortably and not be trapped in a couple of ton metal vehicle. I'm interested in your immediate thoughts on the concept of the 15-minute city. Laura, I want to jump to you. What is the assumed experience of people from your perspective living in this 15-minute city, for example? Or you can take it wherever you want, but.
This is for me, not for Jamie. Okay. I was while you were talking, I thought about something I've seen on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, and the handle is @ShareTheCities. But this idea of Gilmore Girl urbanism. And if anyone here has seen Gilmore Girls, it's not my favorite show, but it's a lot of people's favorite show. But the type of life that folks lead there, the other thing I think about really captures like this kitchen table urbanism conversations is the idea of how you lived when you were, if you went off to college and you were living on a college campus without a car, maybe you had a bike and you would get, I had gone to college at both UCLA and Northwestern for undergrad, and I got everywhere by rollerblading, and I couldn't get from one side of the other campus. A lot of people rode their bikes or scooters or whatever. Like it was hard to get from one side to the other in big college campuses, just walking. And so, thinking about how you get around in these different kind of phases in your life. The other thing I wanted to make sure to mention today around like, how do you have these conversations? I saw on the participants list, a lot of folks here are already engaged in some way in their community on making, safer streets for people that are biking. They're bicycle advocates. They're on the boards of things. They're very influential in terms of setting agendas and policies. But in terms of these everyday, connecting back to everyday life, whether it's college campus or, folks with a lot of wealth privilege that are able to travel overseas, usually, even non-urbanists or urban planning or wonky urbanist types, if you go on vacation, there's a set of people when they go on vacation, they ditch their car, whether it's on a, polluting cruise ship or, to the Cinque Terre, that's where I went on my honeymoon, people seek out car-free parts of cities as their vacation. And if you go to some tiny town in the Midwest or a tiny town, you know, in Eastern Washington, the part that kind of sometimes people gravitate to, you know, you look at Leavenworth, for example, is a real car-free experience. Disneyland is another good example. So just thinking about all the ways that we already seek these out as places that are less noisy. You know, you take out cars in a city and the noise level drops, which is less stressful. And so really thinking about, I hate to say it, but the selfish motives that people would have for a 15-minute city. I think that that's why it's a good frame. Unfortunately, a lot of folks have criticized it for not really having a deep like equity analysis or anti-displacement analysis. Some people see it as like yet another like new urbanist idea that's pro-gentrification. One of the things I love about Maria from Duwamish Valley Affordable Housing Coalition, who's someone that everyone should hear speak at some point, and I've dropped this is the organization that Robin is, you know, central to, but DVAHC is doing that work. And one of the things I heard Maria say at a meeting one time was, we want gentrification without displacement. And I never heard anyone say that before. And I don't know if she made it up or coined it, but I think it's such a provocative thing to say, is that, you know, it's not that people don't want investment in their community or more, you know, whatever amenities that come along with gentrification. Like a lot of times people are worried bike lanes are going to cause gentrification and cause, you know, it to become a more marketable for real estate agent type of situation. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't make people that live there right now either feel like they don't belong anymore or actually like self-evict because they have to, like, you know, I know happened with Vicky, because you realize like this isn't going to work long term. Like there's the numbers aren't crunching out. So yeah, that's a really good reference that Jamie just posted. So yeah, so I'm just going to keep going back to like, how do you make this tangible and how do we get away from GMA and comp plan and zoning and, you know, NC5 commercial, whatever corridors, or, you know, when you get into the bike wonk stuff, level of service and all of that stuff, it's like, talk about quiet, talk about being able to ride side by side, talk about being able to, you know, take a bike ride with your grandmother and your grandkid, whatever, you know, like those kinds of values. I don't know if I answered the question, but I answered some question, maybe another question. But.
It was good. I liked it. Whether you want, Robin, I saw you nodding a lot around the displacement piece, and so I'd love for you to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, my personal perspective at this point, you know, the Duwamish Valley has become kind of a darling of city government and the port, and in some ways the county in the last 5 years. And I honestly, when I hear about improvements now, I disapprove of them. Like, you know, if there's money coming in for a new park, it's like, that's great. We desperately need public space and we desperately need more trees down here. But there is a direct correlation. Each time some investment is made in our quality of life without first investing in affordable housing, it's just a new neighborhood. It's constructing a new neighborhood, making a place for other folks, primarily white and middle class, who are coming down from the middle of the city or new to the city. It's making a neighborhood for them instead. And that's, I mean, it's not right. I think anyone would agree with that. I also wanted to say about the 15-minute city. I haven't heard, this may be the first time I've heard it. It sounds rad to me, but again, you have to consider everywhere. For example, neighborhoods like mine with a highway going through the middle, or with freight lanes, freight streets, or Georgetown, especially with the West Seattle Bridge going down. That's put 100,000 more cars daily coming through either Georgetown or South Park or both. And even if we had amenities, we can't walk them ourselves necessarily, and we certainly can't send our elders or our children out. You know, my kid's in 8th grade and I don't like her to go to walk on 14th because in the last year and a half, 2 cars have flipped off the sidewalk and 1 semi has run into a building. It's just, you have to, there's a lot, not all neighborhoods are set up for a 15-minute city, even if all things are not equal, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know that's a good critique. And I think as me and my team were talking about it, we were like, wait, it's this idea that you can like go to work in your 15-minute city. It's like, well, what about industrial jobs? What about if you work at the airport? What about it's a very it imagines like, I guess for me it conjures up like every neighborhood that begins to look like Capitol Hill, which is like, yes, it's a recipe for gentrification, and it's also completely unrealistic.
Can I say one more thing, because you just made me think, but and again, you know, considering each community differently, if the city were to really put some time and money into career pathways for high school kids here or adults here. I mean, I think there's like 4,000 industrial jobs right here, many of which don't need college degrees, but there's no system to get people into those jobs so they can walk from their homes to them.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Jamie, I'm wondering how this work, the 15-minute city concept, kind of dovetails with the work that FutureWise has been doing at the state level, and yeah, the shifts in HB 1099.
Yeah, sure. The people have seen is a really beautiful idea and a really beautiful vision, but I think as Robin was saying, like we're prioritizing those needs and community.
Oh, I think we completely lost Jamie. She has some connectivity problems, clearly. I think just kind of, excuse me, rounding us out here, I'm wondering, so I think we talked a little bit about who benefits, who loses. I'm wondering, I think, you know, we all three of us, excuse me, have a very like Seattle lens, right? Like that's where we live, that's where we work. What happens when we think beyond Seattle for this concept?
I mean, when I think of, I've had this conversation, I think you have some contrasting visions of what a climate-friendly urbanism is. You have folks like Christine Gregoire pushing brand new cities, which is a really a concept I push back on. But you've got, you know, folks that want, you know, cities from scratch. And then you have folks that want to really address where job centers are now, and this idea of a jobs to housing imbalance. And so you've got these kind of, it's very like business focused, capitalist focused. It's very much focused on like, yeah, employment centers, and where are the employment centers? And we can't ignore that. And I think that there's a way to look at it in like a less like exploitive way, which is going back to what Robin was saying about, you know, you've got maritime and industrial jobs, you know, across the state. It's such a powerful workforce. It's something that we're known for, you know, globally. And yet you have an aging workforce, predominantly male. And you've got a lot of folks not entering that workforce. There's a maritime high school that's really struggled to stay enrolled. There's just a lot of problems with that. And a lot of it is connected to housing, right? Housing is foundational in terms of what we need so that when we do build bike lanes, everyone's able to access them. So assuming that we could just build large, robust, fully protected, wide, all ages, all abilities, biking all around, right, all across the state, and having, you know, robust sidewalks that people can walk on, and like the dream of that, like assuming we could do that, you still have like we kind of all, I think most people, I don't want to say most people because I don't know who all is here, But I'd say a lot of us here know what we should be doing. It's really comes down to not having the money to do it, right? And so when we talk, that's a conversation in urbanist spaces that really frustrates me, because a lot of urbanist spaces are driven by people that are really connected to business, really against taxation, and really don't want to get into the like lack of funding piece for their dreams. They think that the market is going to be able to fix this. We live in a state with no rent control. It's illegal. We have a state that has no income tax. It's illegal. These are big constitution changes that would have to happen with big majority votes. And we can't talk about, we know, or many of us know what we need to do. It's really, and when we talk about political will, I don't like that word because it's so vague. It's like, no, we don't have the redistribution of wealth, like, is the problem. And so in order to make it so that bike lanes or sidewalks or any of these improvements are equitable and just and fair, there is going to have to be a kind of a reckoning in Washington state around how we fund deeply affordable housing. Yeah, so it's my soapbox.
I think that also dovetails with what Robin is saying, right? Affordable housing first. I think that I'm going to invite Jamie to speak. I think that her internet is being super mean to her today. So, you know, I think I want to, I feel like I started out by saying 50-minute cities, boo. Let's talk about something positive. Like, what is something that is working? Like, I know that Councilmember Morales has a framework around, it's not the 15-minute city, but it's like these incremental pieces to get there. And Laura, I think you're involved in that work. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, or if there are other things that spring to mind.
Anybody who's watching this who's across the state can steal this. I think that this is a great framing that she's using. She's calling the comprehensive plan work that's going to be happening over the next 3 years in Seattle and happening in major cities across the state. But she's calling her specific like lens and framework and coalition that she's formed, Seattle Within Reach. And I just love that, because it's like, she's really focused on food justice and economic justice, and she serves on the Economic Development Committee. I don't think that's the right name, but this idea of what is within reach in your community, whether you can get around, you know, to a childcare facility on a protected bike lane, or you can access childcare that's actually affordable to your family. The like within reach refers to both of those things, like physically within reach, economically within reach. And then something I really focus on the community education side of Share the Cities is like psychological barriers. I know personally, I went car free in Chicago when I lived there, and that was the first time, or the second time I'd been car free. I got around by bus in West Los Angeles as well. But each time I've transitioned from being somebody who mostly gets around by car to someone who isn't, there's these like 6 or 8 weeks where it's a real psychological challenge. And the older I get, the harder it is. And so a lot of resistance to change, resistance to 75% or 72% of Seattle is detached housing in single family neighborhoods. And if you don't get that new apartments in neighborhoods where right now they're illegal, people are pushed further and further away. They're pushed to Marysville, they're pushed to Federal Way, they're pushed to Tacoma, they're pushed to Bellingham. Like Seattle's lack of taking care of our community and not putting up like a "we're full" or reserved sign. You know, I really like to think of it like reserving a table at a restaurant, like a VIP table. If all the homes in Seattle are $1 or $2 million, it's basically all VIP tables, right? And so it's super not fair. And it just like, cascades and echoes like across the whole region, like Vicky is such a great example, but what's right, we're supposed to be focusing on what's positive. What's positive is that if you look 5 years ago and you look at now, this is becoming a thing. You see Joe Biden talking about it. You see Jay Inslee talking about it. I had a fantastic conversation with Denny Heck, who's been a leader, talking about how cities need, for climate reasons and for housing reasons, we need to stop making our community so exclusive. And, South Park got rezoned, but Laurelhurst didn't. South Park got rezoned, but Magnolia didn't. South Park got rezoned, but Blue Ridge and Windermere and Montlake, right next to Husky Stadium at the UW, there was a station there. Montlake didn't get rezoned. In fact, they want to be a historic district. And so think about that. And when we do these big changes, who's able to use lawyers and money and influence to not take new neighbors and treats new neighbors and new renters, especially, as kind of like a toxic waste facility that they have to NIMBY, right? And this, I'm really driven through this work, through all of the anti-renter stuff I've heard at land use meetings, that, renters don't care, renters don't garden, renters aren't committed, renters don't have roots. I hear that stuff every day, honestly, online and in person, even when I'm knocking on doors right now. And people are very anti-renter. And that extends to being anti-immigrant and anti-refugee and anti all sorts of things, and just racist. And so some of this, like, who are bike lanes for, and when we're pushing for safe bike facilities, we really have to, like, again, address the and I think things are changing. I think there's an acknowledgement in Seattle that we can't keep making our city exclusive, and these communities that have avoided new families and new neighbors and new buildings and new bike lanes, that it's not fair.
Optimistic. That was optimistic, Laura. We'll see. I'm the pessimist now. I want to thank Jamie for adding a couple of things in the chat. We know that cars are the #1 contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in our state. Land use policies that can get folks out of cars, walking, biking, rolling, taking transit will have a profound climate impact. I think deeply affordable and dense housing is connected by multimodal transportation options with access to good groceries, schools, medical services. And as we think about multimodal transportation, as a climate solution, we need to think about equity, how we can make sure that every neighborhood, regardless of median income or racial diversity, has access to dense, affordable, and transit-oriented housing, so that we do not continue to just displace our lowest income neighbors. And I think that really speaks to Robin and Laura. And my takeaway is that I've been thinking in terms of land use policy, but it's not really just about land use policy. It's coupled with investments in making sure that people can access the communities that we're creating and recreating. I think at this point, I would love to transition to sort of, okay, we've talked about all these cool things, all these opportunities, all these trade-offs. The IPCC report was published a couple of weeks ago that made it clear that the time is now to act on climate. So how can people get involved in these issues? Jamie, I would love for you to post in the chat around the direction we can go forward with HB 1099, which was the GMA reform bill that would have required greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled to be tracked and reduced by communities across the state in their comprehensive plans. That obviously tragically, actually, did not pass at the 11th hour. And so what is happening with that bill and the intent behind it? And while that's happening in the chat,
Well, I can
Laura,
I can try to,
wait, you're back.
everybody knock on wood and cross your fingers, but
Yep.
I haven't nothing's cut out in the last couple minutes, so I'll try to be quick. So yeah, House Bill 1099 was an incredible land use climate bill that coupled the need for us to be reducing our contribution to the climate crisis by reducing our emissions and vehicle miles traveled, with the recognition that so many climate impacts are already in motion. And that we need to be planning for climate resiliency, and how are we going to protect our most vulnerable populations and communities from the impacts of climate that we're already seeing worsen every single year. Again, you know, for anybody who was involved in our campaign, we did everything we could. We handed this bill to the state legislature on a silver platter, and they let it drop, which I think is a failure that that they will be reaping the consequences of for a while to come. But just because the state failed to pass this policy on the state level, and it's not, you know, a mandated requirement that cities and counties do this planning, that doesn't mean that local elected officials are off the hook. And we're seeing across the central Puget Sound region, which are the counties that have their comprehensive plan updates due in 2024, that a lot of local elected officials are stepping up and committing to implement the requirements from this bill in their comprehensive plan anyways, even though it didn't pass. And so Pierce County and Whatcom County are both planning to introduce resolutions to commit to implementing House Bill 1099. We've seen Bothell, Kenmore, and Redmond city councils all making moves to implement it. And the Department of Commerce is still funded to develop the guidelines and support that cities and counties would need to implement this bill, and we're also working with them to identify sources of funding to help local jurisdictions do this climate planning. So I think, and Laura, I hope will speak a little bit more to this, but it's really critical that we are getting involved in the comprehensive planning processes in our communities, pointing to these jurisdictions that are already stepping up to be climate leaders in this space, and implement the requirements from this bill, and really pushing our own local elected officials to follow suit. We're going to try again next year to pass the bill, but for those counties, which was Pierce, Kingston, Snohomish, and Kitsap counties and the cities within them, if you live in one of those counties, you have an update due in 2024. And even if the bill passes next year, it'll be too late for it to be a requirement in your community's next comp plan updates. So it's really critical that we are pushing hard on the local level in those areas to encourage our elected officials to kind of take this guidance that Commerce is putting out and do everything they can to do this critical climate planning work. Because yeah, we should have been doing this planning for, you know, the last 50 years, and we really cannot wait any longer.
Thanks, Jamie. Laura, I'm going to come over to you. Who are the leaders, City of Seattle, who are the leaders doing this work, and how will this process unfold? How can people get engaged in that work?
Not trying to pass a hot potato, but I do want to lift up the work that Robin and other folks are doing at Duwamish community cleanup, river community cleanup around the industrial comprehensive plan as a model for how other communities could engage in their comprehensive plans. So ahead of the residential comprehensive plan in Seattle, the OPCD was doing a process around industrial lands, and I was engaging it in the Ballard Inner Bay area and down in the Duwamish area. Folks were engaging, and a piece that I really missed was around language justice. And the minute they got involved, they were like, wait a minute, none of this stuff is translated, none of this stuff is in language, none of your events have included translation materials or translators. And I had been engaging for 2 years and never brought that up because of where I live, and not that, you know, there aren't folks in Ballard and Magnolia and Inner Bay and Queen Anne that wouldn't also benefit from that. And so I guess what I want to say is, like, it just highlights, that we need folks that have been left out of land use. We need to be like passing the mic and getting out of the way and making sure that if we have like our foot in the door in these conversations because we have the time or the privilege or the clout or the education privilege or whatever, we need to be constantly aware that we don't know what we don't know. And it was a perfect example of when they got involved, they were like, what the heck? We need more time, and you haven't done this right, and who have you been talking to? And like I'm hoping that if Robin wants to jump in, I just wanted to I don't want to tell your story, but you're right here to tell it.
Well, you told it just as well as I would have. I mean, my colleague was the one who did all the policy stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's just the way we go into things. Is it needs to be translated, and not only that, but it needs to be translated into language that folks can understand who maybe didn't go to college or maybe didn't finish high school. I mean, there's a lot of, if you're really doing outreach, I mean, that's what the city said, we want to do outreach, we want to hear what you have to say. It's like, well, if you're going to do outreach, you need to do it in a way that reaches everybody, not just those people that have the privilege and the resources to understand what's going on.
But to answer the original question you asked about who's involved, is the Office of Planning and Community Development in Seattle. If folks want to see a good example, I saw a question that I wanted to talk about in the chat about car-free streets and how to get people to realize that is possible in the United States. Go no further than Bothell, right? Mason and Davina and the other folks in Bothell are kicking butt up there and showing, there was a tweet from the Seattle Times that they turned into t-shirts that said Amsterdam, Brussels, Bothell, ? Right? And really joking about how we are seeing this, unfortunately, they always point to European examples, but there's examples all over, Africa and Australia and South America, but, we like to point to Amsterdam in the Seattle Times. But Bothell is a great example of how a small town can embrace a car-free street. And honestly, you do it and then you deal with the fallout. You don't wait to get permission sometimes to do those things. You do it, and then we saw that in New York as well as they in France and Paris, is you make the changes and then you deal with the blowback and the problems, because when people see it working and they see how quiet it is and how their kids can run around and they don't have to worry about their children getting, hit by a truck or whatever, all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, this is great. But again, asterisk, who is it for? Who is it benefiting? Who is it harming? Which businesses do still might need some economic development support to make the switch to a different experience for their customer base? Those are also things to consider. But Bothell, everyone go check out, there's that article in the Seattle Times, but they're doing great car-free streets. Or it was one street, but they want to expand it.
Car-free street. A positive note to end on. Thank you. I wish we had more time, but the reality is we do not. I want to invite each of you, if you do have a little parting thought in the last minute, to share it. I feel like this conversation is a beginning, not an end. It's messy, it's complicated. Even trying to figure out the process and what matters is confusing. I hope this conversation was useful for you. It certainly was for me. Closing thoughts.
I'll go first because mine's gonna be the shortest. I don't really have anything brilliant to leave you guys with, but I just want to thank you so much for having me. This stuff, it's multi-layered, it's intersectional. You can't talk about environmental justice or social justice or racial justice without all these other laws and rules and initiatives and without being really thoughtful. So I appreciate being here, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Jamie, Laura.
So I think folks should, even if you're outside of Seattle, I think that you should contribute to Seattle's comprehensive plan. So I don't care where you live in Washington State, what Seattle does in the next 3 years in planning the next 20 years will affect the entire state. It will affect climate across the world. What we do or don't do in this next comprehensive plan will affect folks for a generation. There is nothing that says, I just went the other day on my day off and was hanging out with a friend in Bellevue at the Botanical Garden and ended up going to their comprehensive plan meeting and commenting on their comprehensive plan. That's what I do on my day off. Kind of embarrassing, wasn't planning on it, but you can go to another city and comment on their comprehensive plan. You don't have to stay in your boundaries of your city. So you can comment, anyone watching this can comment on Seattle's comprehensive plan, and folks that have been priced out of the city, who never felt welcome in the city to begin with. You know, the first thing Seattle ever did was pass a rule barring, any Indigenous folks from living in the city. Like, everybody should be commenting on Seattle's comprehensive plan, as it is the biggest city in our state. And it does, what happens here ripples out in good and bad ways. And so there's an online platform called Engage. They broke it up into the sections that are related. Somebody had mentioned SEPA in the chat with the State Environmental Policy Act. But that's the big kind of nerdy, wonky, like environmental report that gets done for these land use changes. They broke up the Engage Hub website into the like categories for the environmental impact statement. There's all these like land use words. Don't worry about it. Basically, sign up, comment, have your say. There's definitely a section on climate and focus on that. And yeah, and advocate for anti-displacement strategies as well as fully protected, separated bike lanes.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, and just I cannot overemphasize, if you have the time and the ability and the interest in these issues to take time to advocate and get in touch with your local elected officials and let them know what you want to see. I think I've heard a couple people just in my life, just echoing this kind of, I don't know, very hopeful phrase like, oh, well, it will get better. And I'm like, will it just get better? Like, I'm not sure. Like, I think over the course of my lifetime, things have just gotten worse. And the reality is like, we have some really incredible local elected officials, and we have some people who hold extreme power who aren't going to, necessarily push us in the direction that we know we need to go without immense pressure from the outside. And so the power of grassroots organizing and really building that people power to, enable us to get to a more livable and inclusive and affordable and resilient future cannot be underestimated and is really critical. So yeah, follow the work that Laura does and Share the Cities, follow FutureWise's organizing work, get in touch with Robin. There's lots of resources and ways to get involved, and we really need as many folks as possible calling for these changes.
What an amazing way to end this. Totally right. Thank you all. Thank you for your time. And I wish you all a good rest of your day.